The restaurant smelled faintly of rosemary and roasted chicken, with white tablecloths spread across long wooden tables, each decorated with vases of magnolia blossoms. It was supposed to be a celebration, our rehearsal dinner, 1 week before my wedding. Sophrona held the door open for me as I rolled inside, his hand briefly resting on my shoulder. I smiled up at him, trying to hold on to the excitement I'd felt earlier in the day. Yet the moment I saw my parents at the far end of the room, greeting relatives like hosts at a gala, my stomach tightened. My mother, Valmai, waved as though she'd spotted an acquaintance rather than her daughter. My father, Alifair, nodded with that politician's smile he wore so easily. "There she is," he announced loudly, before pivoting back to a cousin who'd just walked in. I knew that tone, half acknowledgement, half dismissal. A server, clearly taking cues from my mother, led us not to the center of the room where my sister Alethea was already surrounded by relatives, but to a side table near the corner. "Here will be more comfortable," my mother called, her voice dripping with false concern. Comfortable? It was isolation dressed up as kindness. I glanced at Sophrona. He leaned closer and whispered, "Ignore it. Tonight is about us." I nodded, though inside I thought, they've already decided tonight isn't mine at all. The atmosphere was polished, glasses clinking, silverware shining under the chandelier. But beneath it all, I could feel the quiet current of tension, like the hum of a machine you only notice when the room falls silent. Halfway through the first course, my father stood, tapping his glass. "Before we continue, I'd like to honor someone very special," he said. For a moment, my heart lifted. Finally, recognition. Then he turned toward Alethea. "Her birthday is nearly here, and what better time to celebrate her accomplishments? A thriving PR career, her charm, her beauty, she has made us proud beyond words." The room erupted in applause. Alethea lowered her head modestly, as if the attention embarrassed her. I knew better. She loved the spotlight. She'd learned to bask in it while I learned to survive its absence. Not a word about me, not a mention that this was supposed to be my night, the week before my wedding. I forced my lips into what must have looked like a polite smile, though inside my jaw ached from clenching. I caught Sophrona's eyes. He shifted uncomfortably, his hand tightening around mine under the table. "It's not right," he murmured. "It felt," I whispered back, "like my wedding has already been rewritten as her birthday party." That was the cruelty. Subtle, but cutting. In Southern families, birthdays and milestones often blur into communal celebrations. But taking over your daughter's rehearsal dinner? That wasn't tradition. That was theft. Later, as plates were cleared, another small humiliation arrived, wrapped in laughter. A waiter mistakenly placed an extra glass in front of me, thinking my spot was empty. A cousin chuckled. "Guess we thought this was an open seat." My mother smoothed it over with a breezy laugh. "Oh, she won't mind." I leaned close to Sophrona and whispered, "Do you see it? They erase me without even saying a word." He gave my hand a quick squeeze. "I see it," he said quietly. "But let's not let them win tonight." I appreciated his attempt, but it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about being acknowledged as real. Sitting there, it felt like I was becoming invisible in my own story. And invisibility is its own kind of violence. After dinner, we drove to my parents' home for coffee and dessert. The house smelled of cinnamon and polished wood. Guests spread out across the living room, some wandering toward the wide hallway lined with family photos. I wheeled myself over, my eyes scanning the frames. Vacations, church picnics, birthdays, all curated into a visual story of family. My breath caught when I saw the Christmas photo from last year. Alethea was at the center, radiant, flanked by my parents. And me? Cropped at the edge, half of my face visible, my chair cut off as though it cluttered the picture. "That's such a good picture of the family," my mother commented as she passed, balancing a tray of coffee cups. She didn't even glance at me. I stared at the photo. This wasn't careless framing. It was deliberate, symbolic. I wasn't the centerpiece. I was the afterthought, the footnote in their story. In American homes, family photo walls are shrines, proof of belonging. Being cut out wasn't an accident. It was an erasure. I rolled back into the living room, anger simmering under my skin. Sofrona noticed and leaned down. "What is it?" "Nothing new," I said tightly. "Just another reminder." He crouched slightly so our eyes met. "We'll have our moment. Don't let them steal it from you." His words were kind, but inside, a storm gathered. I remembered a line I once read. "The worst loneliness is not being alone, but being forgotten by those who should remember you." This wasn't new, it was a pattern. Tonight was just another chapter in a story they'd been writing for years, where my role was always reduced, minimized, erased, and I couldn't shake the fear. If they could rewrite tonight, what's to stop them from rewriting the wedding itself? As I wheeled past the wall of photos on my way out, the truth hit me like a chill. They had already begun rewriting my place in this family, and in this marriage. I woke with the heaviness of the previous night pressing against my chest. The applause for Alethea still echoed in my ears, as if it had followed me into sleep and refused to let go. Sofrona was already up, standing by the window with the curtains pulled back, light spilling across his shoulders. He turned when he heard me stir. "Morning," he said softly. "Let's go to church. It might help clear your head before this week really starts rolling." I agreed, though peace was not what I expected. At church, my parents were picture perfect. My father's arm rested behind my mother's chair, their smiles impeccable as they greeted neighbors with warmth. And beside them, Alethea sat, poised and glowing, nodding politely as people whispered compliments. Watching them, you'd think last night hadn't happened at all. As the hymns played, I thought about how silence could cut deeper than insults. Sometimes, not being named felt louder than being cursed. And sitting there, watching my family's performance, I reminded myself I needed to stay composed. I couldn't let them see me break. After the service, we moved to the church hall where a brunch buffet was set out. Grits, biscuits, fruit bowls, coffee steaming in large silver urns. As I settled at a table with Sofrona, my friend Lillian slid into the chair beside me. She leaned in, her voice low enough for only me to hear. "Marceline," she said, her tone urgent. "I swear, Alethea was watching Sofrona all night yesterday, and not like a sister should." I forced a small laugh, shaking my head. "You're imagining things. She likes attention, but she wouldn't cross that line." Lillian didn't flinch. "I've seen it before. At the engagement party, she kept finding excuses to sit next to him, touching his sleeve when she made a point, leaning in too close. People notice these things, even if you try to ignore them." Her words planted themselves like seeds of unease. I tried to brush them aside, but they burrowed deeper. I thought of the saying, "Comparison is the thief of joy." Yet in my family, comparison wasn't just theft. It was a weapon. I nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. My biggest fear isn't outsiders questioning me. It's my own family rewriting my story while I'm still living it." Lillian gave my hand a squeeze. "Don't let them." I offered a small smile, but the knot in my stomach only tightened. The brunch continued with the easy chatter of relatives. A cousin leaned across the table, grinning. "Everyone's waiting to see Alethea as a bride one day. She'll look like a queen." The table erupted with laughter. My father nodded approvingly, his eyes shining as though the thought pleased him. No one looked in my direction. I lifted my coffee cup, sipping slowly, hiding behind the steam. How do you fight a battle where your absence is celebrated more than your presence? Sofrona, sensing the weight of my silence, placed his hand firmly over mine under the table. The gesture anchored me. "You're the one I'm here for," he whispered. I gave a faint smile, but inside, bitterness gnawed at me. As I set my cup down, a family friend approached, cheerful but careless. "Oh!" she exclaimed, looking between Sofrona and Alethea. "I thought Alethea was the bride. She looks radiant next to him." The air shifted instantly. Conversations faltered, forks paused mid-air. A few gasps broke the quiet. Alethea lowered her eyes, feigning embarrassment. "Oh no," she said softly, her voice sweet. "It's Marceline's big day." My parents chuckled as though it were a harmless mistake. "People do get confused," my mother added with a smile. My chest tightened, heat rushing into my face. That wasn't a mistake. It was a mirror reflecting what they secretly wished. I steadied my voice, refusing to let it crack. "Yes," I said firmly. "I am the bride. And I intend to walk into this marriage with more than appearances. I bring strength." The friend stammered an apology, but I'd made my point. Sophrona's eyes met mine, pride flashing there. My words weren't loud, but they drew a line. When brunch ended and guests began drifting toward the exit, I caught Sophrona's glance, his brow furrowed. Once we were alone in the hallway, he finally said it. "That comment bothered me too," he admitted. I nodded, my voice steady. "It's not about dresses or looks. It's about respect. I won't let them erase me, not in whispers, not in jokes, and not in careless questions." He touched my arm gently. "I know, and I won't let them either." I believed him. But as we walked to the car, I couldn't shake the sting. In America, public embarrassment lingers like a stain. It doesn't wash out quickly, and I knew with certainty this week hadn't yet drawn its sharpest knives. If yesterday erased me, today tried to replace me, and I feared tomorrow would demand I surrender altogether. 2 days after the brunch, Sophrona drove me downtown to a boutique tucked between brick storefronts and shaded by moss-draped oaks. The air carried the damp sweetness of Charleston in spring, that mix of sea breeze and blooming azaleas. Inside, the shop smelled faintly of lavender and starch, with satin and lace draped across every corner. Light filtered softly through gauzy curtains, making the place feel like a sanctuary built for transformation. I should have felt excitement. This was my final fitting, a milestone for any bride. Instead, I felt the weight of footsteps behind me. Alethea had insisted she come to support me, her words syrupy, her smile poised. But support from my sister never came without strings. The seamstress, a kind woman named Mrs. Harlan, greeted me warmly. "You chose beautifully," she said, brushing her hand across the gown that hung waiting. Then her eyes flicked toward Alethea, who hovered behind me, almost like a shadow. I smiled at Mrs. Harlan and murmured, "Support can feel an awful lot like surveillance when it comes from family." She chuckled politely, but I wasn't joking. Inside the fitting room, Mrs. Harlan helped me into the gown. Sophrona waited outside, flipping through his phone, probably reading emails to distract himself from the anticipation. The gown was ivory satin, simple yet dignified, with delicate embroidery across the bodice. When I turned toward the mirror, what I saw wasn't fragility. It was strength. Despite the chair beneath me, I felt regal. For once, I saw myself without filters of comparison. "You carry yourself like a queen," Mrs. Harlan said warmly. The words touched me more than I expected. It wasn't the fabric or the sparkle. It was being seen. But then Alethea's voice floated through the curtain. "It's beautiful," she said, pausing before adding, "though maybe too heavy for you. Shame if it tires you out." The seamstress's smile faltered. Mine froze into something polite, but inside, a slow burn began. When Mrs. Harlan stepped away to fetch a few accessories, the silence was thick. That's when Alethea slipped into one of the boutique's sample gowns, a glittering champagne-colored piece. She tugged it on quickly, smoothing it over her curves. Then she positioned herself next to me in front of the long mirror, tilting her chin just so, as though posing for her own bridal portrait. For a moment, I felt my lungs tighten. She looked radiant, confident, standing tall, towering above me. Around us, a few shoppers glanced over, whispering to each other. One even smiled at her, mistaking her for the bride. This wasn't insecurity. This was intrusion. I spoke evenly, keeping my voice calm. "You enjoy playing dress-up with my life, don't you?" Alethea turned, smiling sweetly, her voice like honey hiding the sting of vinegar. "I just wanted to see how it feels. Don't be dramatic." That phrase, "don't be dramatic." How many times had I heard it in this family? It was their way of silencing me, of making me question whether the insult was real or imagined. It was a weapon disguised as wisdom. I kept my eyes on the mirror. There we were. Me in my wheelchair, draped in ivory lace, and Alethea beside me, gleaming in a gown that wasn't hers. The mirror reflected more than fabric. It reflected the unspoken story my parents believed, one daughter fit for display, the other better left cropped from the picture. I inhaled slowly. The mirror shows bodies, I thought. It doesn't show hearts. A memory stirred. Eleanor Roosevelt's words. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. I straightened in my chair, lifted my chin, and let my gaze settle firmly on my reflection. She would not replace me, not in this mirror, not in this life. I rolled forward, positioning myself squarely in the middle of the mirror, forcing her reflection to shift aside. You can wear the dress, Alethea, I told her quietly, but with steel in my voice. But you can't wear my life. It doesn't fit you. Her smile flickered. For once, she had no ready quip. The door opened, and Sophrona stepped in. He froze, eyes darting between us. What's going on? Alethea laughed lightly, too quickly. Nothing. Just a little fun. But Sophrona's gaze narrowed. He stepped closer to me and laid his hand on mine. There's only one bride here, he said firmly. Mrs. Harlan returned then, arms full of veils. She paused, sensing the tension. Shall we continue? She asked gently. Silence stretched between us all. I looked back at the mirror, at the strange tableau we'd created. This wasn't sisterly rivalry. It was rehearsal, a preview of betrayal yet to come. As I left the boutique that afternoon, the realization struck sharp as glass. Alethea didn't just want to share my spotlight, she wanted to replace me in it. The evening after the fitting, Sophrona and I arrived at my parents' home for a family dinner. Their dining room, lined with heavy drapes and portraits of ancestors gazing down in stiff disapproval, was lit with a warm glow that should have been welcoming. Instead, it felt staged, as though every polished fork and folded napkin was a prop in a performance. The long wooden table gleamed with fine china, and at its center sat Alethea, already nestled between my parents as though she belonged there more than I did. My mother waved casually when I entered, directing a server with a subtle nod to ensure Alethea's plate overflowed with the best cuts of roast, while mine was an afterthought. I caught myself stiffening, gripping the armrest of my chair. I had promised myself after the boutique that I would not let these little humiliations slip by, not anymore. Yet tonight, I chose silence. Not as surrender, but as preparation. The conversation buzzed with polite words that carried undertones sharp enough to draw blood. They laughed about the guest list, discussed floral arrangements, and complimented Alethea's suggestions for decor, as if she were co-hosting my wedding. Sophrona stayed close to me, offering quiet nods of reassurance, but even he couldn't miss the judgment curling like smoke in the air. When dinner ended and guests lingered in the hall, Alethea brushed past me deliberately. Her perfume, sweet and sharp, lingered as she stopped just far enough that only I could hear her. Her voice dropped, soft as silk. "If you step aside," she murmured, "I'll make sure he's taken care of. You know this life would be easier for everyone if you let go." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "You want me to give up my marriage? For your convenience?" She tilted her head, her smile faint. "Not for me. For you. Think about it. Wouldn't it be easier if you didn't have to struggle?" "I can handle it all, Marceline. You can rest." Her words were honey laced with venom, betrayal framed as compassion. I stared at her, my voice steady though my heart pounded. "Don't dress conquest in the clothes of care. You're not protecting me. You're circling what isn't yours." She held my gaze, unfazed. "You'll thank me one day, when you see how much lighter life is without the weight." I drew in a slow breath, steadying myself. "No, I won't step aside. Not for you. Not for anyone." Her smile faltered, only for a second. She slipped back into the dining room, her laughter ringing out as though the conversation had never happened. When I returned, the sight nearly unmoored me. Alethea had placed herself closer to Sophrona, leaning into his space as she recounted some amusing story. Relatives chuckled, their eyes on her glow, not noticing, or not caring, that I sat silent at the far end. Sophrona glanced at me, confusion flickering in his eyes. He could feel my tension, but didn't yet know the poison whispered in the hall. He shifted his chair slightly back from Alethea, a subtle but clear line, his discomfort plain. I lifted my glass, watching them all. Sometimes, I thought, the deepest betrayals happen in whispers too low for anyone else to hear. And the cruelest stage is the one where everyone laughs, oblivious, while you hold the knife in your heart. After dessert, my mother stood and clapped her hands gently. "Before we end," she said sweetly, "I'd like us all to join in prayer." We bowed our heads. Her voice rose, confident and clear. "Lord, help our youngest to understand that family only wants what is best for her. Guide her to listen, to see that we act only in love, even when she resists. Show her that obedience leads to peace." The words were knives wrapped in scripture, each sentence a dart aimed squarely at me, disguised as holiness. Around the table, relatives nodded approvingly. A few murmured, "Amen," their agreement sealing the judgment. Heat crawled up my neck. They called it prayer, I thought bitterly. I called it manipulation. I whispered, just loud enough for Sophrona to hear, "God doesn't bless cruelty dressed as care." His hand squeezed mine firmly, his silent promise anchoring me. When my mother lifted her head, her eyes sought mine, calm but piercing, as though daring me to object. I met her gaze without flinching. For the first time, I didn't look away. By the time guests left and the night drew quiet, the house was full of polite smiles and lingering shadows. But inside, I felt the lines had been drawn. As Sophrona helped me into the car, I said quietly, "They think their authority is divine. I'll show them my dignity is human and unshakable." He nodded, his jaw set. "I believe you." I leaned back, the cool night air brushing against my face. Confrontation was inevitable, and tonight had only confirmed it. If tonight they prayed for my surrender, tomorrow they would demand it out loud. The luncheon was billed as a pre-wedding blessing, but when Sophrona and I arrived at the community hall, the weight in my chest told me what to expect. The space was bright with pastel florals and long tables lined with plates and crystal goblets. A string quartet played softly in the corner. On the surface, it looked like a celebration, but I noticed the stares almost immediately, some polite, some assessing. Alethea walked in a moment after us, dressed in white lace, not ivory, not cream, white. It was close enough to bridal to make whispers ripple through the guests. My parents lit up when they saw her, as though she were the main event. They fussed over her chair, her dress, her hair, and left me sitting with Sophrona in the background. I thought to myself, hospitality in the South smiles while it slices. People pour sweet tea with one hand and sharpen knives with the other. When the blessing began, my father rose. "Before we eat," he said warmly, "let's give thanks for all the light Alethea brings into this family. Her grace, her career, her beauty. It's a gift to us all." Applause filled the room, heads turning toward her as though she were the bride. My name wasn't mentioned until Sophrona cleared his throat sharply, forcing my father to add a token. "And of course, we look forward to Marceline's big day." I leaned toward Sophrona, voice low. "It's my luncheon, my wedding week, and I'm treated like I'm only borrowing the stage." "I see it," he whispered back, "but they can't erase what we're building." My spine straightened. "I exist," I murmured, "and I will not let them erase me." The toasts began, glasses raised, polite laughter punctuating each one. Then a cousin stood and, with a smirk, said, "Sophrona, you look better next to Alethea. You two make a striking pair." The room laughed awkwardly. My parents smiled as though it were harmless. I sat frozen, pulse drumming. That wasn't a joke. It was an audition. Sophrona's jaw clenched, his hand tightening around mine under the table. He didn't laugh. That silence was its own declaration. I thought of how Southern families often disguise cruelty as humor. The joke isn't to entertain. It's to test the waters, to see how much humiliation someone can swallow without spitting it back. When the plates were cleared, my father raised his glass again, this time his voice carrying a heavier weight. "Truthfully," he said, smiling broadly, Sophrona suits Alethea more, but we support this union regardless. The room gasped, and then silence fell like a curtain. Alethea lowered her eyes in mock embarrassment, but I saw the gleam behind them. My mother reached across the table, patting my hand. "Don't take it the wrong way, dear." I steadied my voice, calm but firm. The wrong way. There was no right way to be told my husband belonged to my sister. I lifted my glass, meeting the eyes of the guests. Respectfully, I chose him, and he chose me. Marriage isn't a family arrangement, it's a vow. Sophrona rose beside me, his voice clear. That's right. I chose Marceline. Not despite anything, because of everything she is. The hush lingered, then a few scattered nods broke the tension. But the wound had been cut in public view, and I knew it would scar. When the luncheon ended, whispers followed us out the door. Sophrona helped me into the car, his face set in lines of anger and regret. "I should have spoken sooner," he said. I shook my head. "No, we'll speak when it matters most. Let them underestimate me." I stared out the window as we drove away, reflections of magnolia trees flickering past. This was no longer subtle exclusion. It was open assault on my dignity. They had said it out loud. My husband belonged to my sister. The next time, they would try to make it real. The reception hall of my parents' mansion glittered like something from a magazine. Chandeliers glowed overhead, their light bouncing across polished hardwood floors. Guests swept in, dressed in elegant gowns and dark suits, murmuring about the wedding just 2 days away. The air buzzed with anticipation, but beneath it, I could feel the sharp edge of judgment waiting for me. I entered in my gown. This was a Southern tradition, to showcase the dress to family and community, as if their approval were another requirement before the vows. Sophrona wheeled me forward gently, his hand steady on my chair. Every movement felt exposed, every whisper magnified. And at the front, my parents stood like hosts at a gala, with Alethea at their side, radiant in another pale dress that mimicked bridal white. I told myself, these events aren't blessings, they're trials dressed in lace. As I moved further into the ballroom, my mother's voice rang out, pitched high enough for all to hear. "It's a shame," she said, her smile fixed. "Such a beautiful dress wasted in a chair. No one will even see it properly." Laughter flickered across the room, some chuckles awkward, others nodding in quiet agreement. A few guests looked away, embarrassed but unwilling to speak. Her words landed like stones. I had braced myself for judgment, but not for mockery carved into the middle of my moment. I steadied my voice, even as my chest ached. "The dress isn't wasted. It was made for me, and I will wear it with pride." Valmai tilted her head, her cold smile never faltering. "Don't be defensive, darling. It's just reality." "No," I thought, staring at her. "You call it reality. I call it cruelty, wrapped in casual words." Southern gatherings thrived on comments like that. Half-truths slipped into public air, where silence became agreement. And here, silence reigned. The humiliation hung heavy. Guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke in my defense. My father clinked his glass, his deep laugh cutting through the awkwardness. All right, he said, redirecting the attention. "Let's not dwell. Let's hear from Alethea." The crowd brightened, relieved to change focus. My sister launched into an easy story about her latest work project, her voice smooth, her gestures confident. Everyone leaned in, laughing at her jokes, while I sat silent, the ache of my mother's words lodged in my ribs. Sophrona leaned down and whispered, "Don't let them take your dignity." I nodded faintly, but inside, the loneliness pressed in hard. There's no sting sharper than being humiliated in public while everyone else pretends it didn't happen. Later, during the mingling, Alethea glided across the room. She wore her confidence like a veil, polished and purposeful. She stopped by Sophrona, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "What a good choice of tie," she said warmly, her fingers lingering. The intimacy of it wasn't lost on anyone nearby. Guests noticed, some raising their brows, but none said a word. I moved closer, my voice calm but firm. "Hands off, Alethea. He's my fiancé, not your accessory." She laughed, soft and sweet. Relax, Marceline. I was only complimenting him. Can't I say something nice without being accused of— Of what? I interrupted, still calm. Trying on lives that don't belong to you? Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed slightly, a crack in the performance. Around us, guests turned away, pretending not to notice, as if complicity were easier than acknowledgement. But I knew what this was. Her gestures weren't random. They were staged performances, rehearsed steps to plant doubt, to make people imagine a pairing that wasn't hers to claim. This wasn't about affection, I thought. It was about replacement. The night dragged on with polite chatter, but beneath it, the tension burned like an ember under velvet. I sat straighter, forcing myself not to crumble. Inside, I made a vow. I would not break under these staged humiliations. Not here, not now. Sophrona caught my gaze, his face drawn tight with anger. He squeezed my hand. "I'm here," he said softly. "Don't forget that." I nodded, though I knew he felt the pressure too. These weren't just family games. They were orchestrated assaults on dignity, one carefully planned strike at a time. And as I rolled past the chandeliers, hearing the murmurs that trailed me, I told myself, public humiliation isn't just about shame. It's about forcing you to doubt your worth. But doubt can become fuel. They don't know it yet, but every word they've thrown has only sharpened me. If tonight they tried to humiliate me in silk and lace, tomorrow they would try to strip away my very right to marry. The evening air was heavy with the scent of magnolia and wine. Strings of lights looped between the oaks in my parents' backyard, glowing like fireflies above the patio. Guests balanced champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres, their laughter rolling in soft waves. On the surface, it was another elegant southern cocktail gathering, but beneath the sparkle, I braced for the barbs hidden inside. Sophrona and I stepped into the crowd together. His hand rested lightly at my shoulder, an anchor I clung to even when I tried to look unshaken. My parents moved from group to group like seasoned politicians, Valmai's smile fixed, Alifair's booming laugh carrying over the music. Their pride glowed brightest when they stopped near Alethea, who stood in a pale gown that caught the light like she had stepped out of a bridal magazine. I reminded myself, in gatherings like these, cruelty doesn't roar. Sometimes it chuckles. Later, as clusters of relatives formed around the patio heaters, one of my cousins lifted his glass. His voice carried just enough for everyone to hear. "Well," he said with a grin, "if this doesn't work out, Sophrona always has Alethea waiting." Laughter erupted, some polite, some hearty. Even my father joined, clinking his glass with the cousins. The words sliced deeper than if he'd cursed me outright. My blood pounded in my ears, but my voice came out cold and composed. "That's not a joke. That's an insult." The cousin shrugged, still smirking. "Oh, come on. Don't be so sensitive." I met his eyes, steady. It's not sensitivity to call a dagger by its name. For a moment, the laughter stumbled. Sophrona gripped my hand firmly. His voice cut clear. "No one replaces my bride." The sound around us faltered into silence. The cousin laughed weakly, muttering something about just teasing, but the sting had already landed. I thought bitterly, in Southern culture, humor is the velvet glove over an iron fist of cruelty. The conversations resumed, but their tone had shifted. I sat quietly, my smile polite, while inside a storm built. Relatives avoided my eyes, as though acknowledging me would force them to confront what they had just laughed at. Alethea lingered nearby, lips curved in a faint smile, her expression the picture of innocence. Inside, my rage pulsed steady and sharp. Laughter at your expense isn't harmless. It's preparation for betrayal. I looked around and saw how easily people settled back into comfort, unwilling to challenge the cruelty that had just unfolded. That silence, more than the joke itself, burned into me. As the evening deepened and the champagne flowed more freely, my mother drew me and Sophrona aside near the veranda. Her tone was soft, but her words were knives. "You should understand," she said, her hand resting delicately on my arm. "If you go through with this marriage, don't expect any inheritance or family support. We cannot endorse a union that weakens the family image." I felt Sophrona stiffen beside me. I answered evenly, though my pulse raced. You mean your image, not the family's. My father stepped closer, his smirk sharp. Alethea would secure this family's legacy better. Everyone can see it. The chill in his voice cut deeper than the cousin's so-called joke. This wasn't teasing, it was bargaining with my dignity. Sophrona spoke before I could. His voice was firm, unwavering. We don't need your money. We're building our own legacy. His words hung in the air, louder than the music. Several guests had overheard. Whispers spread like sparks across dry grass. I could see heads turning, eyebrows lifting, conversations breaking into murmurs. My father's jaw tightened, but he forced a laugh, patting Sophrona's shoulder like it had all been harmless banter. Bold words, he said, but his eyes betrayed the fury beneath. We returned to the crowd, but the shift in atmosphere was palpable. I could feel people glancing at us, recalibrating, deciding whether to align with tradition or with truth. Inside, I repeated silently, they were no longer just belittling me. They were trying to buy my replacement. Despite the humiliation, I sensed power stirring in me, a strength born from refusing to bend to their threats. Sophrona's defiance only sharpened mine. In that moment, I knew. We were united, and their money, their threats, their jokes couldn't rewrite that. The night ended with polite farewells, but as we left, I could feel the lines hardening. The stage was set for a confrontation no longer veiled in humor or whispers. If tonight their daggers were wrapped in laughter, tomorrow they would be unsheathed in plain sight. The church hall shimmered with candlelight, chandeliers glowing above the long tables set for the rehearsal dinner. Guests streamed in, dressed in their best, their voices rising and falling in practiced politeness. Waiters carried trays of wine and hors d'oeuvres, the clink of glasses blending with murmured conversation. Sophrona and I walked in hand, but the weight in the room was already pressing against me. At the head table sat my parents, Valmai and Alifair, with Alethea poised proudly beside them. She wore another pale dress, glowing under the lights as if she had been chosen for this stage. My parents radiated ownership, as though this gathering were their victory lap. The air was thick, every smile too sharp, every laugh too rehearsed. I whispered to Sophrona, "This isn't dinner, it's a performance, and I'm not the guest of honor. I'm the trial." He squeezed my hand. Then let's hold the line together. When my father stood to give his opening remarks, I felt the room shift. He raised his glass, voice booming. "Let's be honest," he declared. "Sophrona only chose Marceline out of pity. Any man in his right mind would prefer Alethea." Gasps rippled across the tables. A few chuckles followed, cruel and careless. For a moment, I froze. The insult rang louder than the clinking of glasses, louder than the rustle of dresses. My throat tightened, but I forced my voice to steady. "Pity doesn't build vows," I said, my gaze cutting through the silence. "Respect and love do." Sophrona pushed back his chair and stood, tall and unwavering. "I didn't choose her despite the chair," he said firmly, his voice echoing through the hall. "I chose her because of who she is." A hush fell. Some nodded slowly, while others exchanged doubtful glances. I thought bitterly. They didn't just doubt my worth. They doubted the very foundation of our love. But as the murmurs rose again, I felt all eyes turn toward Sophrona. Someone called out, "Say it again!" Another voice whispered, "Does he mean it?" He hesitated. The silence stretched too long, each second an eternity. Every moment he didn't speak, the ground beneath me cracked further. My breath caught, my pulse thundered. Around us, guests smirked knowingly, as if they were waiting for the inevitable withdrawal. Sophrona turned to me, squeezed my hand. But he said nothing more. His silence, even in loyalty, was read as weakness. Inside my chest hollowed. Even my anchor can be shaken. Even he can falter under their weight. I straightened, swallowing the despair, but I could feel my voice trembling inside me. Then my mother rose, her voice slicing through the noise. "We cannot stay silent," she announced, turning to the crowd. "This marriage weakens the family. If anyone here agrees, stand with us now." Chairs scraped against the floor. Several relatives shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting. A few stood, hesitant but upright. The hall erupted into whispers, the weight of public judgment pressing down like a verdict. I stared at them all, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. This isn't a trial. This is my life, and I will not be erased. The words rang louder than their whispers. Sophrona finally stood at my side again, his hand on my shoulder. His jaw was clenched, his eyes burning with belated resolve. But the sting of his earlier silence still lingered, the scar etched into my heart. The dinner collapsed into chaos. Some clapped in support of me, their voices rising with hesitant courage. Others muttered disapproval, whispering about tradition, about image. I sat tall, the fire in me refusing to bend. They had turned my rehearsal into a courtroom, but tomorrow they would try to turn my wedding into an execution. Later, when the hall emptied and the last guests drifted away, Sophrona leaned close. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have spoken sooner, louder." I turned to him, my voice quiet but resolute. "Then do it when it matters most. Tomorrow." As we left, the church bells tolled in the distance, a grim reminder that dawn would bring war disguised as vows. If tonight they tried to convict me, tomorrow they would try to condemn me, and I would be ready. The church smelled faintly of wood polish and lilies. Light from the stained glass windows painted the pews in shades of ruby and gold, but the beauty did little to calm my trembling hands. Sophrona squeezed my fingers gently as we stood together at the altar. Around us, the congregation waited. Neighbors, extended family, pillars of the community, all gathered in their Sunday best. At the front pew, my parents sat like judges at a trial. My mother's face serene, my father's jaw firm, Alethea at their side with her chin lifted proudly, as though this day somehow belonged to her. This was supposed to be my sanctuary, the place where vows would bind us before God and community. Instead, it felt like a courtroom, and I was already on the witness stand. I whispered to myself, "This is the moment I must not falter." Just as the minister prepared to begin the vows, my father stood abruptly, his voice booming. "We object. This union should not go forward." A gasp swept through the church. The sound of whispered judgment rolled across the pews. Faces turned toward me, pity etched in their eyes. The heat rose in my chest. Before I could form words, Dimity, the best man, stepped forward. "May I speak?" he asked, his voice steady. He reached for the microphone, his eyes glancing between my parents and me, my heart clenched. Sophrona's closest friend. If he turned against us here, the damage would be irreparable. Dimity began slowly. "They are right about one thing. This family has a pattern." A murmur rippled through the guests. My breath caught, the betrayal sharp. For a moment, I felt the world tilt beneath me. Then his tone hardened. "And that pattern is cruelty disguised as tradition. Today, it ends." Shock froze the room. Heads swiveled from him to my parents, confusion spreading. For the first time all morning, the attention shifted away from me. Dimity's voice grew stronger as he stepped toward the front. "This isn't the first time they've sabotaged love in the name of honor. Years ago, when Marceline's brother wanted to marry, they declared his bride unworthy because she was a single mother. They shamed her until he walked away, forced into estrangement." Gasps erupted. Guests leaned in, whispers scattering like sparks. Dimity pointed gently but firmly toward my parents. "This isn't about protecting family dignity. It's about control." My mother stiffened, her eyes icy, lips pressed thin. My father shifted, adjusting his tie, but his face was pale. I stood taller, feeling strength swell inside me. It wasn't my trial anymore. It was theirs. Sophrona's hand tightened around mine. He stood straighter beside me, his jaw set. His silence no longer felt like weakness. It was solidarity. The congregation's whispers grew louder. "Did you know about this?" one woman hissed to her husband. "All these years?" Dimity's words cut through the rising storm. "Family secrets, once hidden, are now bare before all of you." And in that moment, the weight I had carried for so long lifted, just slightly. Before anyone else could speak, another voice rose from the pews. An older woman stood, adjusting her glasses. My breath caught. I recognized her. Mrs. Hill, my high school English teacher, someone I hadn't seen in years. "I have to say something," she declared. The congregation fell silent, all eyes on her. I watched Marceline fight harder in life than any student I ever taught. She is no burden. She is the strongest woman I know. Her voice wavered with emotion, but her gaze was clear. If anyone doubts her worth, they doubt the truth itself. The silence stretched, and then came a low murmur of agreement. Guests nodded, some even clapping softly. For the first time, the voices defending me came not from my bloodline, but from those who had simply witnessed my life. Tears pricked my eyes. Sometimes the most powerful support doesn't come from family, but from those who saw your worth when family refused to. I turned back toward my parents. They sat stiffly, my father's hand clenched on his knee, my mother's face carved in stone. And beside them, Alethea's composure cracked. The smile she had worn all morning faded, her knuckles white as she gripped her clutch. The whispers spread like fire through dry grass. "So it's true?" one guest muttered. "How many times have they done this?" For once, their silence condemned them, not me. I could feel it. The authority they had carried all my life was slipping, their pedestal crumbling beneath them. But even as I stood there, chest rising with cautious hope, I saw the storm gathering in Alethea's eyes. She wasn't done. Not yet. The best man had taken the stand, and for the first time, my parents looked like the ones on trial. But the fight wasn't over. It was only shifting to my sister. The church was no longer hushed with reverence. It hummed with restless energy. Dimity's words still hung in the air, and Mrs. Hill's defense of me echoed in the minds of every guest. My parents remained stiff in the front pew, their posture strained with denial, but I saw their hands clenched, knuckles white. Beside them, Alethea sat with her mask firmly in place, her head tilted slightly, lips curved into the practiced smile of a sister trying to look supportive, but her hands trembled in her lap. The silence wasn't peace. It was a fuse waiting to ignite. I could feel it pressing against my chest, urging me to prepare for the blast. Sophrona leaned close, whispering, "Stay strong. Whatever comes next, we face it together." I nodded, though my eyes stayed locked on Alethea. My parents had been exposed, but she was the one who still believed she could rewrite my life with a smile and a lie. Dimity signaled toward the sound booth, and a low crackle filled the church. "There's something else you all need to hear," he announced. The technician pressed a button, and suddenly, Alethea's voice filled the sanctuary. "If you come to your senses, Sophrona, you'll realize you belong with me, not her." The words rang sharp against the vaulted ceiling. Gasps broke from the pews. Someone muttered, "Did she just?" I turned my gaze to Alethea, her face drained of color. The carefully crafted concern shattered into panic. "That was taken out of context," she blurted, her voice too high, too brittle. I rolled forward slightly, my voice calm but unyielding. "You didn't just covet my place, Alethea. You tried to steal my life." She shook her head, frantic now. "No, it's not what it sounds like. I was trying to protect him, to protect the family." The congregation buzzed, whispers racing from row to row. Protect him? From what? She's been after him all along. My mother reached for Alethea's arm, hissing, "Stay composed." But it was too late. And the mask had slipped, and the truth was already on display. Before the murmurs could drown me out, Sophrona stepped forward. He moved to my side, then lowered himself down onto one knee by my chair before the altar. His hand found mine, his voice strong and steady. "I didn't choose you despite your chair," he said, his eyes locked with mine. "I chose you because of your strength, your fire, your soul. You are the only woman I want standing with me for the rest of my life." The congregation fell into stunned silence. The weight of his words sank deep, cutting through the venom that had been poured into the room. I heard someone sniffle. A guest whispered, "That's love." For years they had called me a burden, a weight to be managed, a shame to be hidden. And in one sentence, Sophrona crowned me his equal. My throat tightened, but I lifted my chin. "Thank you," I whispered back, though the words carried more power than any vow spoken that day. Then it happened. Row by row, people began to stand, not to applaud us, but to abandon the pew where my parents sat. The once crowded front row, a symbol of authority and pride, emptied like sand slipping through fingers. I watched it unfold slowly, deliberately. Aunts and uncles rose quietly and shifted seats. Neighbors avoided my parents' eyes as they slid further back. One by one, the space around Valmy and Alifair became a void. Their power didn't collapse in private. It crumbled in front of the entire town. Alethea sat frozen, her mask gone completely now. She looked small, diminished. All the years she'd played the golden daughter had unraveled in seconds. I turned slightly to take it in. This is what truth does, I thought. It empties thrones built on lies. But even in that moment of vindication, I saw the danger in my parents' eyes. They exchanged quick glances, their stoicism barely hiding the panic beneath. They weren't finished yet, I told myself. People like them never surrender without one last strike. Sophrona leaned close again, his voice low but steady. This is our moment. But be ready. They'll try again. They'll use whatever weapon they think still has power. I nodded, my grip tightening around his hand. I knew what he meant. The money, the inheritance. Their last weapon wasn't words or whispers. It was control through wealth, and I could already feel them reaching for it. Their voices had shamed me for years, but today, the silence of empty seats was louder than all their judgment. The sanctuary still buzzed with murmurs after the confrontation. Guests clustered in groups, whispering about the voicemail, Sophrona's vow, and the sight of the front pew emptying around my parents. The stained glass windows threw fractured light across their stiff faces, and I could see how brittle their posture had become. Valmy sat like a statue, her lips pressed together, refusing to show weakness. Alifair stared straight ahead, as if sheer willpower could keep his world from collapsing. Alethea's mask had cracked beyond repair, her hands twisted in her lap, her pale face exposing what her smile could no longer hide. For years I was their silence, I thought. Today, their silence condemned them. The air in the church felt changed. Where once their authority had filled the room, now power rested not with their performance, but with truth. And I could feel the crowd leaning toward it, like plants turning to light. Dimity, still holding the microphone, cleared his throat. He glanced at me, then at the congregation. "There is something else you all deserve to know," he said. He reached into his folder and pulled out a stack of papers. "My firm handled a review of your late grandfather's estate," he continued, his tone sharpened with precision. "Contrary to what you've been led to believe, the inheritance was not left to Valmy or Alifair. It was left to Marceline." The words rang through the church like a bell. Gasps erupted. Heads turned, whispers shot across the pews. "What?" a relative blurted. "That can't be true." Dimity raised the papers. "The estate was left to her. Your parents withheld it, claiming it was theirs to control. But this document is legal and binding." The blood rushed to my face. I had known they controlled me through shame, through words, but they had also stolen my legacy. It wasn't just dignity they tried to strip from me, I whispered to myself. It was legacy. My mother stood abruptly. "This is a distortion," she declared, her voice trembling despite her attempt at command. "Those papers are misinterpreted. Dimity cut in, his voice even. "No, they are not. Every page is signed and sealed. You knew exactly what you were hiding." Alifair rose next, his bluster louder but hollower. "This is family business. It should not be aired in front of strangers." But the weight of the truth pressed him down. His words rang empty, bouncing against the walls of a congregation that no longer saw him as a patriarch, but as a fraud. The public reaction was swift. Relatives shook their heads, muttering, "Disgraceful." Some stepped away from my parents physically, their chairs scraping against the floor. The gulf widened, literal and figurative. Alethea tried to speak, her voice cracking. "This is all exaggerated. You don't understand." But no one rushed to soothe her. No one validated her script. Her words fell flat, her practiced tone of authority gone. I watched from my chair, my chest rising with a strange mix of sorrow and vindication. The pew that had once crowned their pride now felt like an exile. Their seat of power turned into an island no one wanted to inhabit. Sophrona bent close, his hand steady on mine. "Do you see it?" he whispered. I nodded slowly. Yes. For once, they are the ones shrinking under judgment. I rolled forward slightly, turning to face the congregation. My voice came clear, steadier than I felt. For years, I was told I was unworthy. Today, the truth speaks louder. I was never less. I was only hidden. A hush spread across the church. I took a breath and quoted the words that had carried me through dark nights. Maya Angelou once wrote, "You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise." And I will. Applause began softly, then grew. Not the polite clapping of social obligation, but the strong rhythm of conviction. Sophrona stepped beside me, lifting his chin proudly. "We will build our future on truth," he said, his voice resonant. "Not manipulation, not control, but love and honesty." Tears pricked my eyes, but my voice held steady. My words aren't just for them, they're for me. Today I seal my independence, not just as a bride, but as a woman who will no longer be erased. As the ceremony thinned and guests prepared to leave, people came to me with genuine congratulations. A neighbor clasped my hand warmly. "We always knew you had strength, but today you showed everyone." Another guest leaned down. "Your grandfather would be proud. He wanted this for you." Their words landed softly, not as weapons, but as balm. At the edge of the room, my parents remained silent, cornered by the weight of what they'd done. Their authority was gone, yet their presence still cast a shadow I knew would take time to fade. I wheeled closer to Sophrona, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Their power is broken, but their shadow lingers." He kissed my hand gently. "We won today. Tomorrow, we live free." I exhaled, allowing myself to believe him. For the first time in years, the weight pressing on my chest felt lighter. I thought to myself, I had been erased for years, but now my name was written in ink they could never blot out again. The reception hall next to the church filled with uneasy chatter as guests shuffled in. The revelation of the will still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. People carried plates of food they barely touched, their whispers louder than the music playing softly in the background. I wheeled in with Sophrona beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. My chest tightened at the sight of my parents already stationed near the head of the room, glasses raised, smiles brittle but determined. They lifted their champagne as though nothing had happened. My father's voice carried, too smooth, too rehearsed. "To family unity," he announced. My mother chimed in. "Yes, to love and to strength." But their words were hollow, and the polite clinking of glasses that followed sounded more like obligation than celebration. They thought they could stitch power back together with a toast, I thought, watching them. But power isn't wine, it's trust. And theirs had spilled away. Beside them, Alethea stood with her chin high, lips stretched into a smile that no longer convinced anyone. She refused to concede, even as the ground beneath her crumbled. My father's voice rose again, this time darker. "The money was never the point. Influence is. If you walk away from us, Marceline, you walk away from this entire community." My mother placed her hand on his arm, but added her own venom. "Friends," she said sweetly, "don't be deceived. We raised her. We know her weakness. She'll stumble, and when she does, you'll all see why we tried to protect this family." Gasps rippled through the hall. The words stung deeper than any financial threat. They weren't just pulling wealth away, they were trying to assassinate my character, to paint me unfit before the eyes of those who had watched me grow. When wealth fails, I thought bitterly, abusers turn to slander. Their aim was never just money, it was erasure. I felt the fury rise, but instead of breaking me, it steeled me. I reached for the microphone. My fingers shook, but my voice was calm and deliberate. "They raised me, yes," I said, locking eyes with my parents. but only to erase me. They called me weak, but today, I am the only one who stood against them. The room stilled. The sound of my voice seemed to push back the walls. Sophrona stepped forward, his hand finding mine again. "We choose truth," he said firmly, his voice steady and unwavering. "Not their legacy of control." I nodded, lifting my chin. "The inheritance left to me will not be hoarded in shame. It will not rot in a vault while they twist it for pride. It will be used to build a community center for every child, every woman, every man told they are less. So no one here will ever feel erased again." A silence, heavy and sharp, held the hall for a breath. Then came the gasps, then applause. Hesitant at first, then rolling forward like a tide. The sound echoed against the walls, drowning out the last fragments of my parents' hollow toast. I turned toward them, their faces pale, eyes wide. The weapon they thought they still held, the power of money, had been flipped, turned into something greater than them. Power isn't keeping wealth, I thought, watching their collapse. Power is giving it away on your own terms. It was Alethea who cracked first. She lunged forward, her voice shrill. "She stole everything. It should have been me. Everyone knows it." The congregation fell silent. All eyes turned toward her. The desperation poured from her voice, no longer hidden behind modest smiles or soft-spoken comments. For years, she had been their perfect jewel, polished and praised. And tonight, she revealed herself as brittle glass, shattering loudly in front of everyone. People shifted away from her, their gazes hardening. Sympathy that once floated to her effortlessly vanished in a breath. A neighbor shook her head. "Shameful." Another whispered, "She wanted his place, his life." I sat still, steady, letting the scene unfold. She was never meant to replace me, I thought. And now, no one will ever believe she could. My parents sat, isolated at last. Their shoulders sagged as the applause continued. Not for them, but for us. For the truth they had tried to bury. Around them, the air emptied. No friends remained, no allies lingered. They tried to erase me, I thought, but erased themselves instead. Sophrona bent close, his voice gentle against my ear. "This is the first day of our life, not theirs." I breathed deeply, my chest lighter than it had been in years. It was a bittersweet triumph. Justice had been served, but scars would remain. I knew healing would take time. Yet for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the shadow they cast. I turned toward the crowd, raising my glass once more. Not in defense, not in desperation, but in declaration. Family didn't make me strong, I said clearly. Their cruelty did, and I rose beyond it. The applause rose again, strong and sure. This time it wrapped around me like armor, not pity. And as Sophrona lifted my hand, smiling with pride, I felt the truth settle deep within me. I walked, or wheeled, into my marriage not as their shadow, but as my own light rising beyond their ruins.